Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into my channel, Hildenbrand Guitar Academia. We go on with our course of covering E major tonality, so in the more classical Western harmony sense, but we take a more linear approach as we did also in the previous course on minor tonality, E minor. So now we are on E major, and after we had discussed the tonic and its dominant, so the dominant in the context of resolving to the tonic, we will discuss today the dominant, the different diatonic dominant versions and its secondary dominant. And down in the description below you find the link where you can download, or you should actually download the PDF file. It helps supporting my channel, of course, but you needed to really have the full package and to really understand and get everything out of this lesson today. All right. So let's first talk about the dominant chord, the different diatonic possibilities in when we are in E major. So the dominant in E major is B7. And actually we can say the dominant chord in E major is just a triad actually. Just an B major triad, so B, D sharp, F sharp. That's all we actually need to clarify. We have the dominant in the E major scale. So let's just briefly play this E major tonality again to let our ear settle. And now when I'm going to, when I just play these triad notes, then we have this dominant sound. That's also very frequently used in classical music, of course, and in all music, but when we go to jazz, we almost never have this triad. We almost always have it as at least an added minor seventh or dominant seventh chord. And also in classical music, this is happening very, very frequently. That's the most common, very most common seventh chord used in classical music. And the idea, of course, of the minor seventh is also to give more dissonance to the chord, because the function of the chord, of the dominant chord, is dissonance resolving to the tonic. Dominant tonic is dissonant and or tension and release. And of course, with this added minor seven, we have this characteristic interval in the dominant seventh chord, the characteristic dissonance, the tritone. Yeah, so A, B, C sharp, D, the three whole tones, so tritone. And this minor seven is also called the characteristic dissonance of a dominant chord. So really, if you have a major chord and you add a minor seventh to it, you in a way you cannot help to make this chord getting like a dominant function. So any major triad and you add a minor seventh, you give that major chord the feeling of now being a dominant chord and that it wants to resolve to its tonic or secondary tonic, so down a fifth, perfect fifth, or up a perfect fourth. So that's something important to know, because it's really also later when we talk about the subdominant, we have the major 6 as a characteristic tone, the characteristic pitch of, or tone function of the subdominant, and at the same time it's like the same it's the same thing in a way, the same, I mean, we will talk about that later, but just remember the characteristic dissonance of a dominant chord is the minor 7th, and the characteristic dissonance of a subdominant chord is a major 6. That's all for now. Okay, and of course the function is to resolve to the tonic, and I already did that in the previous lesson about the tonic E major and its dominant. So we already talked about the different scales and possibilities of the dominant chord. Now I want to just go a bit more into the diatonic possibilities of the dominant chord. There is another form, you can say, of the dominant chord, and that is the sus chord. And sus, what does it mean? It means suspension. The major third, is suspended by its 4th, or by the 4th of the chord. So we have this typical then it resolves. Then usually it goes to the tonic. All right, and when we take a look at that, it's of course not a standard triad here. In jazz, actually, you find a lot of possible ways to get that sound. I mean, a lot of possible ways of thinking and constructing the chord, and in a way, this chord is actually like an in-between thing of the subdominant and the dominant. So in a way, it's a subdominant sound on the dominant, because the B really needs the D sharp, needs the leading tone, and the leading tone is not something you normally use the D sharp on the subdominant, on the A chord in E major. But what's like the very characteristic voice leading, if you are in jazz and you have this 2-5, we did not talk too much about that, but anyway, I think when you get it until that point, you know that a 2-5 is a progression with the chord on the 2nd and then on the 5th degree, usually resolving to the tonic, to the 1st degree, to 2-5-1 is the standard jazz progression. And when you have these 7th chords, you have these typical traditional 3-note voicings. So F sharp minor 7 would be the 2, all 7th chord, and then going to B7, you have this E going to D sharp, and that's really the characteristic voice leading, the characteristic or most essential movement, what's taking place. So it's like subdominant, dominant, but the most important thing is E going to D sharp. I could actually go more into detail about that. Maybe just briefly, I mean, always if you have a half step like E and D sharp, one of them is the strong note, and the other note is in a way is a disturbing note, which actually wants to rule and wants to get this other note resolved to to him or herself or itself, and so in that context, sorry, in the context of F sharp minor 7 or A as a typical subdominant chord, A major, of course the E is really the chord tone, the strong tone, and the D sharp is really like, it's actually a nice sound, but it's really the dissonant sound. When you go to B7 or B major, it's different, you know. If you go to E, actually that's really the dissonant sound, and you hear that it's in that context it really wants to resolve to D sharp. So the functions really drastically in a way change when you have E and D sharp on the subdominant and E and D sharp on the dominant. But however, so the main thing here is the E going to the D sharp when you go from subdominant to dominant. Now, when you have a dominant chord and instead of the D sharp have an E, then in a way you have a kind of a double function there. You insert the function of the subdominant on the dominant. Yeah, so the sus, the dominant sus chord is in a way like a very weak dominant chord, because also if it wants to proceed further to the tonic, it already showed the E, so it's not really like a huge resolution, because it already showed that note, so it's not a big thing. Okay, so let's go to that to the different versions of that chord in jazz. When I have a B sus chord and the B sus chord, I can actually find like different voicings for that, and one voicing would be, for example, A major triad and a B in the bass. So A major is my sus as my subdominant triad, but I have B, my dominant root, in the bass. So this chord, yeah, this is like a B7 sus with an added 9 in this case. But that's one way to think about or to analyze a dominant sus chord is it's a subdominant chord, but with a B in the bass. So it's in a way it's like a slash chord. And I show you that. I put my capo here, and I have a B root. So the typical thing, the typical versions is A over B with all this, and then the typical resolution. Yeah, so the E goes to the D sharp, and then of course I have the real dominant, and it resolves very nicely to the tonic, to E major. Then I could also add the major 7 on the A chord, so it's still a subdominant 7th chord, but with a B in the bass. Yeah. And also the resolution would be. So that's so we can say it's an A with a B in the bass, or we can say it's an A major 7th chord with a B in the bass, or we can say, because the second degree also, the F sharp minor also has subdominant function. It's a parallel chord of the subdominant. We can have a F sharp minor, for example. We can just have this thing here, but put the B in the bass. Actually, that is not really a B sus chord, because we don't have an E, of course. But it's in the same kind of a category, and when I just played it, you hear, oh yeah, it's has the same kind of quality. You have this B pedal, and then you have a subdominant there which wants to resolve to the dominant chord, to the B7 or B major triad. Okay, but when you add the minor 7th to the F sharp minor, so you have an F sharp minor 7th chord, then you add the B, then you really have that that typical sound which really wants to resolve to, and then to, or whatever. Yeah, so F sharp minor. Classical resolution here. Okay, so these are this is something you also have to consider when you have as a diatonic chord possibility of the dominant. And another suspension you can have on the dominant chord is in German it's called Vorhaltsquart Sechstakkord. So it's like a suspension of the 5th and the 3rd, and the 5th is suspended by the 6th. So the F sharp is suspended by the G sharp, and the D sharp, the 3rd, is suspended by the 4th by E. And when you do that, so instead of resolve it back to the 5th and 3rd of the dominant chord, you actually have a suspension, but at the same time you have an inversion of the tonic. So you have B, G sharp, E, and that's just an E major chord with B in the bass. So second inversion of E major. And this is very frequently used in classical music, of course, as a typical suspension. So, and then going from that, E with B in the bass to B major triad, and then very frequently adding the minor 7th to the B dominant, and then resolving it to E to the tonic with the root in the bass. So that's a very typical progression. Later on, we will have a lot of examples, voice leading examples, like nice ways with 3-part structures actually, and to also practice like different inversions and drop 2, drop 3, and all these forms. And there you will have a lot of examples for that progression. Okay. So when we consider this sus chord, we have different, like 2 main arpeggios we can use. One arpeggio we already had and we used it for the tonic, for E, and it's like E, B, E, F sharp. But we can also, we have to be a bit careful with this arpeggio, but we can also use this arpeggio for B sus, because actually it is just a B sus4. Try it. It's just an arpeggio of a B sus4. But very easily, our ear tends to hear E as a root, or like when we stop on E or we play it more long, then we have the feeling, oh, this sound already resolved to E. So we have to be a bit careful not to show the E. So like prominent, we always have to bring this E back to F sharp, or we have to rest a lot on B itself as a root. And when we do that, we really have this sus sound. So you can do that. Then we can resolve that to B, in this case, B dominant 7th arpeggio, and you really hear that quality, sus and resolution. And also we can use a B7 sus4, like a 4-part structure, which is actually, when we talk about the original or the basic scientific symbol or structure, it's actually a 3-part 4th chord. We have F sharp, B, perfect fourth, B, E, perfect fourth, E, A, perfect fourth. So that structure, 3 perfect fourths, is actually the same or equals the B7 sus4 chord. And we can have these different inversions, and we can play that as an arpeggio. Okay, and then I resolved it. In this case, I resolved it to another 4-part structure, B with an added C. So that's kind of goes a bit out of the tonality, but resolves very nice on back to the tonic. And we talked in the last lesson about that, in the lesson on the E major tonic and its dominant. Okay, let me see what's on the page here also. The secondary dominant of the dominant. Also in German we call it Doppeldominante, or English would be double dominant, so the dominant of the dominant. And this is F sharp major, or F sharp 7. Remember when we add the 7, the minor 7s, we make a major chord even more dominant. But in this case here we already have an interesting principle, and that principle is if we have a minor chord, so in this case we have F sharp minor in the diatonic scale of E major, and we make this minor chord major, so we alter the minor third to the major third, we make this dominant. So we give that chord a dominant function just by making this by altering the minor third to the major third. This already gives us the quality, oh, now we want to resolve actually. Listen to that. I play in E, some E major thing. Now I go to F sharp minor. play an F sharp major chord, and you really hear the A sharp wants to move up, because it's an alteration, it's an upward alteration. The minor third gets up to the major third, and then the tendency is very clear, it wants to resolve up, because to the B, because A sharp is not in E major, so it's a dissonant note, it's really out, and then it wants to come back somehow to that's really the dissonance is actually like a tendency, an urge to resolution. So if we have E major again, maybe I do a bit different progression. I go from E major to C sharp minor to another diatonic chord, and then to F sharp minor, and then I make this chord F sharp major, and then you hear that it really wants to resolve to B major chord, or B dominant seventh, or whatever. So E major, now C sharp minor, F sharp minor, F sharp major, and then yeah, you hear that? And this dominant quality, of course, gets much more clear also, or when you insert also or when you add the minor sevenths to this F sharp major chord, because then it's really obvious that's a dominant, that's a secondary dominant now. Okay, let me just show that to you. So we have an E major, and we go to C sharp minor, F sharp minor, yeah, so that was really like going from F sharp minor to F sharp dominant sevenths, and you really hear, okay, that really wants to resolve, and it sounds very logic when that goes to B dominant sevenths. Another way, a very frequent chord progression, especially in jazz and blues, is the subdominant going, so the 4 chord, going to the sharp 4 diminished, going to the E, so the tonic with B in the bass, going to the dominant, going to the dominant sevenths, back to the tonic. But actually just this movement, either directly to the B or to E with B in the bass. We talked about that, so these are both like versions of the dominant. But this one is of course the suspension, and then later on we go to the dominant, the E with B in the bass. But the other, we also can go directly. Yeah, something like that. And this, what's called, what we call here like an A sharp diminished, we can also explain as a secondary dominant of the dominant. So an F sharp 7, but in this case without the root. Yeah? So in German it's called like verkürzt. There is the root is omitted, and when we omit the root of an F sharp dominant seventh chord, we have an A sharp diminished chord. But that's all on the page, and also there are some scale possibilities. And there are also some arpeggios you can use. We will talk a bit more about this F sharp 7 going to B7 when we talk. I will do one lesson about like chain of dominance, it's called. So a dominant resolving to another dominant, resolving to another dominant. So we have like this kind of a progression. So just dominance in the cycle of 5, or cycle 4 actually. And because we always calculate upwards, that's the system here on this Guitar Academia. So I will talk about this progression, like secondary dominant, dominant, in a bit different context, also later, maybe next lesson, I'm not sure, but it will follow. Okay, then there's another nice progression or a nice chord. It's C dominant 7. There are different ways how we can explain that chord. Like a C of course, it is like is a note we find in E minor. Yeah? It's a flat 6. So this also a C major triad is actually a chord which is diatonic to E minor. And that's also why this chord, the C7 or C major triad, is actually more settled and more logic in a way to use an E minor. But we also can use, but we also talk about that later. We can also use chords from the minor tonality in the major tonality. Yeah? Maybe not all to the same degree in a way, but like we can. Something very important is to also use a minor subdominant in major. And the minor subdominant, the characteristic pitch, is really the C. And so whenever we use a C in an E major context, it's quite likely that this gives us in a way like a door, opens a door a bit to the minor subdominant. Okay, and this C chord, or also what we use here, it's C dominant 7th, and we talked a lot about that in the course on E minor as an augmented 6th chord. But also in this case, this is actually, we call that a tritone. In jazz, we call that a tritone substitution. Tritone substitution of F sharp 7. So we have F sharp 7. Yeah, the most important pitches are the root, the minor 7th, and the major 3rd. And then we have the tritone. Yeah, so we interchange the root of the secondary dominant to the dominant with its tritone. And then the other notes they just stay, so E and A sharp, they just stay. And then we have this C7th chord, which is also like going to B7, like F sharp 7 to B7. It's like very similar. But of course we have this half step here. The root progression is just a half step, and that's one of the main consideration also, of course, when using the C7 instead of the F sharp 7. And in jazz, of course, or we can also use both. Like we have F sharp 7, and then we add tension in the tonality of E major and do this tritone substitution. So that's more tension in E major, and then we go to B7 and we back to E major 7, for example, if we are in a jazz context. Also, with tritone substitutions, of course, when you change a bass note, then all the other notes of the chord and maybe its alterations, maybe you use more notes on top, they change its function. So that's also a good reason sometimes to use actually the tritone substitution to make the melody note or the tensions, extensions more interesting. So for example, like a perfect fifths in F7, F sharp 7, like the C sharp, becomes a flat 9. In C dominant 7. So that's a kind of a consideration. So that's about tritone substitution. And yeah, and as I said, this really opens a door to the E minor tonality in a way. So that's why it's good to really understand this chord as an augmented sixth chord in the E minor tonality, and I talked like one whole lesson about that. And then you understand more how to where it's coming from and how you can deal with that in the E major context too. Okay, maybe I just for the end of the lesson, I just play a little, and also maybe I get some more ideas what I can tell you about this secondary dominant here. Now let's see. Okay, maybe that's also interesting. Interesting for you. What I'm just doing here is I have in a way I have my focus, which chords I want to feature, or what I want to show, or what my whole practice is, because it's what I'm doing is actually kind of practicing. What topic my practice is about. And then I try to pre-hear the next chord. I try to pre-hear. Okay, that sound is coming now, and when I'm improvising, when I am on a certain chord, in a way I'm checking whether from that that combination of notes, I'm just showing whether it's possible to go very smooth to the new chord. So I try to create a kind of a direction, or like an environment where the next chord, to open the door for the next chord. And so I try to explore in a way. I play with my notes, the notes I have on my chord I'm just on at the moment, and then I try to find ways with voice leading, with staying on certain notes which open the door to the next chord. Yeah, not to have that one chord, the next chord, the next chord. No, I want to do that very like prepared in a way, like more smooth, you know, like telling a story, and then I go there. It's not like boom, I'm there, boom, I'm there, you know. All right, that's it for the lesson. I hope it was helpful or interesting or whatever for you. Please, if you don't understand anything or something, leave your comments down in the description below. Also, there is a possibility to donate to support this channel. Just go on my website, huphildenbrand.com. There you find a button where you can donate. And yeah, that's it for that lesson. Thanks for watching. My name is Hup Hildenbrand.